You just announced a raise for Sandbox, and I know you're doing things with Snoop Dogg in there as well. And you guys seem to almost kind of license or pull brands into the gaming universe and allow them to kind of thrive on their own. I'm trying to get my head around exactly what you guys do, but maybe you could tell me and then tell me about some of your games as a way of maybe describing it.
Sure. So first of all, I mean, the way to think of Animoca Brands is we're looking as a goal to really sort of deliver digital property rights. That is our North Star. That is our big mission, to deliver digital property rights. And so we very early recognized that there's no way that we could do this ourselves. And in fact, it would be a little bit of a sort of hypocritical if we wanted to deliver true digital property rights to all by ourselves, right? So that's one of the reasons we decided to make investments in the space. And frankly, we can't do it ourselves anyway. And that is how we got early into OpenSea and Sky Mavis and Dapper Labs and Wax, Decentraland, and of course the Sandbox, which is part of Animoca Brands, and a whole host of other companies that we got involved in. We've done over 100 investments, and we've done over 12 acquisitions, actually more probably at this point, and we continue to want to do this. And just to be clear, we don't have an ambition to be controlling any one of these. Sandbox runs very independently, and while we are still majority owners, we fully expect that in the future, Sandbox will be completely decentralized and will be owned by its users, because we really believe that the only way any unit, any society can actually sort of survive, for a long run, if not forever, is if there is a majority interest in its success. And that means that the players themselves have to own it, right? And that is how we construct everything. So from that perspective, it's almost like if we're, building up the next New York or the next Chicago or the next Hong Kong, and our ultimate outcome we'll own maybe 10 or 20% of the real estate and, own some businesses in there. We think that's a great outcome. And we will do this across multiple places around the world. We don't want to run them. We don't want to control them, because if we do, we actually become what we actually don't want to be in the first place, right? And I think this is the reason also why we can make all these investments, because if we have such a big sort of involvement in everything that is open, it actually means that whatever we're building ourselves, whether it's tools, services, or other metaverses, we have to continue building it open, because it's not just something that we philosophically believe, it's also in our economic interest to do so, right? And that's the construction of it. Ideally, half investing and sort of having a stake in everything that is in the open metaverse, ideally, and the other half, constructing and building things that the open metaverse might need, right? And the approach that we've taken is that we are often, you see us buying game companies that have audiences and users, but aren't yet on blockchain. And so what we do is we acquire these game companies that already have users, and then bring them and onboard them with the concept of real ownership in the digital context, and basically supercharge their economies. And that has worked very well for us. And of course, there's now other companies out there essentially emulating the model, which is fine, because if we have a shared network effect across Web3, then as more people enter the space, actually the rest of the ecosystem grows, means that even the other half of our portfolios will also all rise as a result of that, which is basically what we're experiencing in the moment. And so most recently, one of the other things we've done, both with our own fundraise, like bringing in strategic people like Sequoia or Ubisoft or LCD, Kingsway, all those guys, with Sandbox, we just recently brought in SoftBank. Yeah. And again, SoftBank is amazing and legendary investor, of really, if you think about the sort of birth of the internet, actually, it's one of the most important players. And to us, that was really important to bring them in as well, because they invested in the open metaverse with Sandbox, which means now they have a stake in helping the open metaverse succeed, rather than going for, another Roblox, for instance, which is, fun and everything, but doesn't care about constructing open and wants to build walled gardens. And so that's part of our mission as well. We're bringing in investors and partners and everything, because that capital, money itself is no longer really that scarce, as you well know. However, the money that is special is the one that has influence. SoftBank is an example of influence. Once they are sort of, tasting the potential of the open metaverse, the open Web3, hopefully they'll continue to invest only in Web3 things. And that sort of power that comes in actually becomes the influencing factor that we want to see happen. That is how we combat the likes of a Facebook or maybe even a Microsoft that wants to control that space, whatever well-intentioned they might be. Because once they actually have the power, because they have the majority of that network effect, unfortunately, bad things will happen, because absolute power tends to corrupt. And that's the problem we see historically. And in fact, it's been playing out right in our eyes right now in sort of, what's happening inside Facebook, right?
Do you see just obvious parallels between this and crypto assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum and the banking world and the government, where we see, a lot of pension funds and banks now investing and talking about this and countries adopting it, whereas you still have central banks and fiat currencies that are probably going to still hold on to their control mechanism? I mean, you're doing something quite a parallel here with gaming in 3.0.
Well, first of all, I think, people used to think that internet, so the original internet, Web 1, was kind of a parallel universe, right? That somehow didn't touch the physical world. Well, clearly that wasn't true, right? And I think Web 3 is exactly the same. The reason why it feels like a parallel universe for people who are not in Web 3 is because they're not there. They don't experience it. Right? I remember back in the day as well, when smartphone came about, and we were telling our sort of game studios at the time, look, we got to move on the smartphone. This was in 2010, right? And we came out with our first big mobile game really at the end of 2010, and in 2011 it sort of took off, right? And many of the console game developer guys were just like, I'm not touching mobile games. That stuff is trash. Why would I ever demean myself in making product for something like this? And that's because they never used a mobile phone. They didn't use a smartphone. They were using Blackberries, using different devices. So their frame of mind was just completely unable to understand it because they weren't in it, right? And though that's the same is true for what's happening with Web3. The people who are in Web3, they just can't talk enough about it. They will never go back to the old one, right? Once you're in there, like, once you've taken that red pill, you're just like way down that rabbit hole. You just don't want to get back out anymore, right? But how do you explain that to someone who's not even there, right? That's the hard part, right? And so there is, of course, the fear of the unknown, but there's also the other thing, which is, like the incumbent issue for, companies, people themselves have incumbent natures too. I'm a successful finance person in a way that I understand. I can sort of do sort of intrinsic analysis on fundamental value, right? All these things that they've known, which has served them so well in the past. The problem is that model doesn't serve this young generation at all, because the opportunities that they had are all gone anyway, right? They already have real estate. They already own a stake in the physical world, right? And the young people that are just emerging in this world, who just went through 4 years of college and are in debt, they're looking at this and saying, what's there for me, right? And so, normally in history, this is the beginning of revolution, right? And the revolution in those areas tend to be quite bloody when you look at historical context, which is not great. But with the metaverse, there's actually this new development because of the way the world has developed, where actually people who are digitally native and comfortable, that's their opportunity. It's like this age of exploration where they can go out and discover new lands, and they don't have to go to space to do it. They can do it right here at home in the virtual plane. And that's actually what's so powerful and different here. And as we've seen so many times in history, young people do create a revolution, but this one doesn't have to be bloody. This one just moves people over because they're going to create all this wealth and all this new opportunities in the metaverse, and they're populating this at rapid hyperspeed, eventually to the point where, people who are sort of, not from that are going to come to recognize it and say, maybe we need to take a look at this more seriously. But I don't think it comes at the expense of them, right? So I don't think it's zero sum. That's the thing. You can be very successful in the metaverse, and it's not going to take away the benefits of someone who is not in the metaverse, who's already made it, as it were, and owns his land and lives there quite nicely because he owns his property already. He's fine. He doesn't need to, he may not even need that, and that's perfectly okay.